Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another video on the Second World War. In this particular video, we're going to look at the first really big turn in World War II when the Axis starts to set themselves up in a position where they're not going to win this war. And in this particular video, we're going to look at things from the point of view of the Pacific Theater and the war against Japan. So the last time we talked about Japan, of course, was in the video about the modernization of China and Japan between World War I and World War II. And as you can see from this map, the Japanese began the invasion of mainland China in 1937. And of course, hopefully you remember the rape of Nanjing and the violence and atrocities and just horrible, awful, terrible things that occurred as a result of this particular war. Well, the Japanese continued to expand, of course, because they were being controlled by a political group called ultra-nationalists. The ultra-nationalist party was following the prime minister, whose name was Hideki Tojo, and Tojo basically promised the Japanese people that if they gave him all the power in their country, he would make them safe and strong and prosperous forever. And remember, after that Tokyo earthquake, the Japanese people were so afraid that they were willing to, when we add to that the economic horrors of the Great Depression, the Japanese people were willing to give him all of the power. And then, of course, they started to follow commands and expand and conquer more territory. Eventually, this led them into a war in French Indochina. And of course, eventually, the United States took action. And in 1939, the United States passed a law which said we would no longer sell militarily important products to the Empire of Japan. So things like aluminum and steel and airplane parts and oil and all of those types of things were no longer eligible to be traded between the United States and the Empire of Japan. Now, the problem is, from the point of view of the ultra-nationalists in Japan, this was weakening their empire, and of course, the one thing they could not tolerate was weakening their empire. And so the United States of America became a target as a result of the threat that we posed to the security and prosperity of the Empire of Japan. So the Japanese started to make plans for how to encourage the United States to begin trading those militarily important goods with their empire again. Now, in the meantime, in August of 1941, President Roosevelt signed a document called the Atlantic Charter, which laid out the goals of a potential alliance between the United States and the United Kingdom if the United States ever chose to enter the war. So it really looked like he was setting up the United States to be involved on the Allied side against the Axis if there were ever a cause or a justification for getting the United States involved. Now, of course, that cause was going to come very quickly after signing of the Atlantic Charter. On December the 7th of 1941, the Japanese Navy decided to take one decisive action against the American Navy in the Pacific. The United States had its entire Pacific fleet in one place at one time, and you can see it's very neatly organized in very, very straight lines. The Japanese Navy decided that if they could take one huge operation and cripple the American Navy, they would be able to convince us that we should start trading with the Empire of Japan again. And so on the morning of December 7th, 1941, a aircraft carrier strike group went to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and launched the now infamous Pearl Harbor attack. So what we're looking at here is Japanese Mitsubishi Zero aircrafts taking off from the aircraft carrier Shikaku. This photograph is actually a historical record from a Japanese spotter plane. The bomb you see going off in the background is actually the very first bomb to go off in the Pearl Harbor attack. And it's massively destructive, right? This is an attack on the American Navy in one place at one time to try to convince us to sign a peace treaty to begin trading with the Empire of Japan again, and it's hugely destructive. This is a photograph of the USS California, which is sinking. This is a battleship which is sinking in Pearl Harbor. The USS Arizona, which of course is now very famous for the Peace Bridge, which exists over top of it, and the memorial to the USS Arizona. The USS Arizona, of course, was directly hit and did eventually sink to the bottom of Pearl Harbor. The USS Shaw was a destroyer, so a relatively small ship that the forward magazine, and the magazine is the place where you keep all of your ammunition, was actually directly struck. And so you can see it looks like fireworks coming off of this explosion. That's the ordnance. That's the big naval shot and naval rounds and gunpowder exploding when the USS Shaw ignites and explodes. In total, the 353 Japanese planes sank 4 battleships, 3 cruisers, 3 destroyers, an anti-aircraft training ship, and a mine layer, in addition to 188 aircraft, and of course killed 2,402 Americans, as well as wounding 1,282 Americans. So this was a hugely destructive thing, but in actuality, the United States got very, very lucky. If the attack had come a few days earlier or a few days later, we may not have been so lucky because there were 3 ships that were not in Pearl Harbor on December 7th. And that was kind of just by random dumb luck. It just happened that the day that the Japanese attacked, the 3 most important ships in our Navy weren't actually in Pearl Harbor. And those ships, of course, were our 3 Pacific aircraft carriers. And aircraft carriers were the backbone of our Navy, and they are still the backbone of our Navy to this day. When those 3 aircraft carriers were not in Pearl Harbor, they survived the attack, and they became the backbone of our efforts to defeat the Empire of Japan. So we got very, very lucky that those aircraft carriers were not damaged or destroyed during the Pearl Harbor attack, because otherwise we may have had to sign that peace treaty. We may have had to give the Japanese what they wanted. Now, once they attacked the United States on December 7th, 1941, on December 8th, President Roosevelt called Congress back into a special session, just specifically to declare war against the Empire of Japan, which we did. In response, Germany and Italy eventually would declare war on the United States, and the United States then decided to join an alliance to make a team of countries that were all at war against the same countries. So we formed an alliance with the United Kingdom, with the Free Government of France, the Free Government of Poland, the nationalist part of China, and ultimately decided that we were going to put together a team to fight our common enemies. Now, the decision was ultimately made that what we were going to do was we were going to focus on what was called a Europe First policy. People in 1941 decided that the hardest war to win was going to be the war against Germany. And so what they decided to do against Japan was, at the beginning, they were just going to try to play defense against the growing empire of Japan. We were just going to try to slow them down so that we could win the war against Germany, and then eventually we would start to play offense against Japan. Now, when it comes to turning points in World War II, there's a couple that we have to understand. So if we look at this particular map, I know there's a lot going on here, but we're going to slide all the way down to the very bottom of the map, where we can see the word Guadalcanal, August 7th, 1942. Now, we're actually not going to talk about that particular battle, but we are going to talk about a battle that happens right there, and the battle is called the Battle of Coral Sea. At the Battle of Coral Sea, the 3 aircraft carriers that were not destroyed at Pearl Harbor got their revenge and broke the Japanese Navy. And from the point of the Battle of the Coral Sea, right where the words there say Guadalcanal, Guadalcanal, right where those words are, the Battle of the Coral Sea is what started the Japanese Navy backing up along these long chains of islands. Now, the second turning point in the Pacific is way up in the top right-hand side, which is called Midway, Midway. Midway was another huge battle, and it was another major turning point in the Pacific War. And the reason that it was such a big deal is right before the Battle of Midway, the United States broke the Japanese military code. So we were actually reading their orders as they were issuing them. And one of the things we realized and one of the things we learned was the Japanese were planning a huge invasion of the island of Midway so that they could use that as a forward operating base to take control of the Hawaiian Islands and to continue to assault the American Navy in Hawaii. The problem for the Japanese was that we had broken their code and we knew that this was coming in June of 1942. And so the United States was actually able to get ready for the Battle of Midway, and we trapped the Japanese Navy and the Japanese soldiers that were landing on the beach, and really we had a crippling defeat of Japan in the Battle of Midway. This destroyed their navy so much that for the entire rest of the war, which is going to take 3 more years, they're going to continue to back up. They're going to continue to lose ground and to lose territory. Now, the way I want you guys to understand the war in the Pacific is, if you look at the 2 long red lines leading up to Japan, so one red line starts down there at the Battle of Coral Sea and moves along the kind of very large islands up through the Philippines up to Okinawa. The other line starts out at an island called Tarawa, Tarawa. It starts there and it kind of moves along those very small islands all the way up that chain of islands to an island called Iwo Jima. Both of those chains of islands are really super important, and of course the United States Navy and Marine Corps especially worked their way along those islands in order to be able to get close enough to mainland Japan to start attacking itself. However, many of these islands were very heavily fortified and defended by the Japanese. In order to deal with that, the United States created a policy that was called island hopping. If we got to a point where an island was very heavily defended and it was going to be very difficult and costly and time consuming for us to capture that island, we just simply went around it. We captured islands that were very lightly defended around it, and then we just surrounded them and waited for them to run out of supplies and to eventually surrender. And using that process of skipping the heavily defended islands and taking the lightly defended islands, we worked our way up both of those island chains to really 2 battles that you guys are going to have to worry about. The battles of Okinawa and Iwo Jima. And both of those battles were extremely difficult and extremely bloody and extremely hard fought battles for the United States to win. They took months and months and months to win. They cost tens of thousands of American lives. They were extremely difficult, but we had to have both of those islands of Iwo Jima and Okinawa because on both of those islands there were airstrips. And those airstrips would allow us to start bombing mainland Japan, and that's exactly what we started to do. From the time we captured Okinawa and Iwo Jima, we started pretty much the non-stop bombing of mainland Japan. That's where we're going to leave this for this particular video. In the next video, we're going to look at turning points in the European theater of World War II. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that it was informative. Make sure you like the video and subscribe so that you're getting the updates for when the new videos are starting to post. If you've got questions, please leave a comment below or leave a comment in the Google Classroom. Stay healthy and stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.